Who Are You? Who Are You? With Jeff Hutchison.
Today on Who Are You, a man who speaks for many who have difficulty. A man who stuttered so badly as a kid, it might take a full minute for him to form a single word. A man who, because of the impatience and lack of understanding in the wider world, spent a decade as an elective mute, choosing to write words rather than utter them. That Peter Dew is my guest says something about his ability to conquer his fears and plenty about his remarkable life. And I reckon I've seldom awaited hearing a guest speak with such anticipation. Peter, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jeff.
Who are you?
I guess, first of all, I'm a really fortunate man. I've got a wonderful wife, a wonderful family, and I'm living a great life. So, yeah, very fortunate man. Farmer's son, 30 years as a medical scientist, so a great career. And the last 9 years, I guess, facing my fear, but more importantly, I think helping other people find their voice, unlock their potential through the spoken word, which, as you know, was my fear.
Yeah, of course. You grew up in Denmark on a beef and wheat farm?
Beef farming in Denmark. My father was a wheat farmer previously in the wheat belt before he moved to Denmark. So, yeah, farmer's son.
Tell me a bit about Rod and Doris.
So, two perfect parents. My father and my mother gave me that unconditional support and helped me realise my dreams. And it started about age 7 when I was watching some science programs on ABC and I wanted to be a scientist and wanted a chemistry set and hounded mum and dad for a long time. And sure enough, at about age 7, age 8, my father relented and brought me a chemistry set, much to, I guess, our neighbours and our grandparents' concerns, fireworks, explosives, stink bombs, those kinds of things, which, yes, I did make all of those. Yeah. But it just allowed me to really build that desire to become a scientist and drove my ability to get through high school, get through university, despite lots of doubt about my ability to survive in that environment.
Okay. When did your family become aware that you had a stutter? Do you remember when you were aware you had a stutter?
My recollection's about grade 2 in primary school, and at that stage we'd learnt enough reading to be able to stand up and read from our books. I was asked to stand up and read, and the words were unable to come out. I stuttered, I blocked, and people laughed. And for the first time in my recollection, I realised I was not the same as all the other children and had trouble speaking. Mum tells me it was from about age 3.5, but I guess that 3.5, through to 7-year-old, you're just having fun, playing with kids. Yeah. The bullying's not there, but as you get a bit older and you start to be more self-aware, that's when it really starts to impact you. I
imagine that the self-awareness exacerbates the problem?
Yes, yeah, and it's, a bit the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart. So I know that when I speak that I will probably stutter. So therefore it's easy to avoid speaking and then you don't take the risk of stuttering. And when you know you have to speak, the thought that you may have to stutter obviously exacerbates that, and it's a vicious circle. Yeah. Or that's how it used to be. I'm not too bad now.
And you're better than not too bad. Your dad had a stutter, and I guess I'm interested to know, is there a genetic disposition in us to stutter, or is it a family trait or a tendency?
Yeah, my father stuttered quite badly. My younger brother stutters as well, but very mildly, and just goes on about his life. They say it tends to run in families, so familial would be the right terminology to use. They haven't found any specific gene as yet. They're still searching, but so they can't say it's genetic. It's not learned, so although my father stuttered, I didn't learn it from him or decide to mimic him. It's just one of those things that appears. And if you describe my dad's stutter, my stutter, and my younger brother's stutter, they're completely different stutters. They manifest themselves in a completely different way.
How did yours manifest itself? It's an odd question, but most of us don't stutter. What does it feel like?
So mine's a block. Generally, if you just look at the physical moment of speaking, stutters are either repetitions, so my name is Peter. The other one is prolongation, so my name's Peter. And mine's just a block, so my name's, and that's me forming a block on the P, my name's, and I just push and sometimes bite my tongue. And so that's the physical way. Internally, you're trying to come up with different words.
Yeah.
You're trying to say to yourself, slow down, breathe, all of those things. But mine's a block, and people used to look at me and think, have you forgotten what you want to say? On the telephone, they'd hang up on me, or heavy breather on the phone.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about some words that were particular problems, just to remind our audience what it must have been like to be you at different times in your young life. Now, you're an 8-year-old kid in Denmark. It's the 1960s, and I'm trying to think, who's going to offer Peter some help here? Your parents take you to an elocutionist who prescribes what?
So we went to Albany, half-hour drive from Denmark, and I had marbles put in my mouth, and I had to learn to speak with marbles in my mouth. If you've seen the movie The King's Speech, back in the 1920s, marbles were the cure that the royal surgeon prescribed, and in the 60s, I'm still having marbles put in my mouth. Nursery rhymes on those letters that I used to stutter, which used to be, I think, about 25 letters in the alphabet, and had to practice those nursery rhymes over and over again. So really, probably before the science of speech pathology surfaced, and just almost witchcraft type cures. And had I been in Africa at the time, they may have slit my tongue because they'd assumed that, my tongue was tongue-tied.
Yeah. Was it an awful experience? Do you get used to it? And I'm talking about you before you go off to Guildford Grammar. I mean, because you did your schooling at Denmark. Did life roll on happily enough, except for when you had to open your mouth to speak?
Yeah. So life was really kind to me in Denmark. Small school, good group of friends, played football, played cricket, so I was able to, I guess, perform on the sports field where you didn't need to communicate as much. Managed to fly below the radar most of the time within class. I remember we had to do a piece of drama or a verbal report, and my best friend's sisters had just got one of the first tape recorders. So we spent the weekend taping, editing, until I got about 5 minutes of fluent speech, and the teacher allowed me to play that tape in class as a way of passing that assessment. Other times I used to just play hooky, so being on a farm, we'd go down to the school bus stop, I'd hide in the bush, school bus would come, leave without me, return home, I'd walk up home pretending I've been at school all day, forge a sick note from my mother, hand it in the next day, and avoided that assignment.
You went to Guildford Grammar, and you talk about your Denmark schooling experience being small and supportive generally.
Yes.
What was different about Guildford? What happened there?
So you're now 15 years old. I'm 15 years old, and I'm starting in a new school where year 11 and year 12, because Denmark only goes up to year 10, and a group of boys that have been together since the start. So I had to break in, and the enrolment clerk of the day got frustrated with my inability to give my name, address, my date of birth, my parents' names, and threw down the enrolment form and a pen in front of me and said, look, why don't you fill this in yourself? I don't have time for this. So I filled it in myself, and kind of a light bulb surfaced, and I thought, wow, this is easier than trying to speak. At the same time, some prefects discovered that I stuttered, and they used to regularly just corner me and ask me lots of questions, just waiting for me to stutter. And every time I stuttered, they just used to laugh, and you could see that smile on their face. So I stopped speaking each time the prefects asked me all these questions, and that caused some strife, and I had to write lines.
What do you mean you had to write lines?
You will write, so boy, you didn't answer our questions. You will go away and write 2,000 lines on why I shall speak to prefects before you go to dinner. So I'd have to write these lines. It was a form of punishment, I guess, at the time.
It's a form of bullying.
Oh, yes. But prefects had the power then. But at the same time, Guildford took me out of my comfort zone. The chemistry and the physics really stretched me, and I dare say if I'd stayed in Albany, my mind wouldn't have been stretched as much at Guildford.
In some respects, it provided the opportunity for you to go on and pursue the career that you really wanted. I'm interested, you played footy, there's a degree of acceptance when you're playing footy and cricket, and you sang in the choir. and as you know, that is one of the great contradictions here. Can you explain why Pete can sing in the choir but has difficulty giving us his name and his date of birth and where he grew up?
It's to do with the breathing, and you'd have to speak to a speech pathologist as to why people who stutter don't stutter when they sing. And there's quite a few musicians out there who stutter, such as Carly Simons. Marilyn Monroe was able to sing Happy Birthday, Mr. President. One of the brothers within the Oasis band, I can't remember if it's Liam or Noel, a whole host of people who sing also stutter. In fact, Ed Sheeran also stutters and talks about being bullied at school. It's to do with the breathing. We can also read in unison. So if you have a primary school kid who has to do some reading out loud and you don't want to humiliate them, get the class to read in pairs, and that person can then read in unison with another person reading. So it's just something to do with the synchronicity, the breathing. I cannot give you the scientific reason.
My guest this morning on Who Are You is Peter Dew, and there was a time where Peter didn't speak much or at all. What was it like, Pete? Do you live inside your own head? And is that a bit of a risk to live inside your own head?
I guess I was always a dreamer, always a schemer, always had plans, and always working at ways of succeeding despite people putting in barriers and saying you can't, you won't be able to do this, you won't succeed. So I guess I grew, plasticity of my mind, determination, and I always let people know that when someone puts up a barrier, treat it as an opportunity, and you'll find a way around it if what you're aiming for is important to you.
You were very goal oriented too, so that must have given you this sense of purpose that said, okay, well, that's what that part of my life is like. This is what I want to achieve.
Yeah.
And what's so great is that you've been able to achieve all those things. I want to just talk about a couple of things because, I talk for a living and I rely on my ability to find words to express myself. What lengths would you go to avoid speaking? And I want to use an example that I know is relevant here. Tell me about living in Narrogin and not telling people that you lived in Narrogin.
That's one example. So Narrogin, it came out beautifully then, is one of those bogey words. So I'd be in Perth with friends, barbecue, meeting some strangers, and where do you come from? What do you do? And I would go to say Narrogin. The words would not flow, so I would just say Williams, which is 20 kilometres or 30 kilometres next door, and they would say, I've got a brother who lives in Williams. Which street do you live in Williams, Peter? And, of course, I didn't know any of the streets in Williams, so my response would be, look, I've only just moved there recently. I don't know my address as yet, and I'd look really stupid. I didn't say my wedding vows, so I was about to get married, and then I realised I'd have to speak. So the wedding was going to be called off. And my father, despite his stutter, was rather traditional and expected speeches. So a cool-headed priest said, look, Peter, we'll do it this way. I will say your vows for you. And you just say that I do. And if you can't say I do, then just nod. So in the church in Denmark, 1980, I nodded to my wedding vows, and 37 years later, I'm still married on a nod and a wink, I believe.
We'll talk briefly about your career, because you talk about a priest assisting you in that situation. You go to Curtin to study medical science. Tell me about Professor Ian Lee. What was he to you? So
Ian was rather a helpful lecturer, and I had to do a tutorial, and because I did not speak in class and I refused to do tutorials, he got a little bit frustrated with me and said, look, you prepare it all, put together the overhead transparencies, write out my script, and I'll present your tutorial on thyroid hormones. And I said, OK, thank you very much for that. And that's how I passed that unit. Later on, when we were playing football, now, Ian used to play rugby, but we didn't have 18 boys for the university football team. So he played, and he kept being caught for holding the ball. He put the ball under his arm and run like a rugby player would, and the umpire would pay the other side a free kick. So I used to scream at him fluently, kick the thing, and there was another word in there, kick the ball. And after the game, next lecture, he took me aside and said, so Peter, how come you need me to present your tutorials, yet on the football you can swear at me, call me all sorts of names so fluently and effectively? What's happening here? So, yeah, fluent on the football field, fluent singing, but when it comes to speaking, really struggled.
You went for a job as a medical scientist at the health department. You've been with the health department across several hospitals and a range of places, including Narrogin. The last 8 years, you managed WA's organ donation service. We now call that Donate Life. And life has proceeded happily. You met and married Violet. I wonder if you can tell us when things changed significantly. And this is after your dad dies.
Yeah. So, as the oldest of three boys, when my father died, I was age 41. So Dad was an older man when he was married and an older father. And I decided to do his eulogy. No one told me to. I just knew that I owed my father that honour. And it was the scariest thing that I have ever done. Probably the first time from recollection I've spoken in front of a group of people. So even though I'd had speech therapy, this moment was one of the hardest in my life. But I decided to do my father's eulogy. And what I discovered as I was preparing for Dad's eulogy with Mum was that Dad had achieved all these great things, life member of all the football clubs, the cricket clubs in Denmark, Senior Citizen of the Year, President of the Lions Club. And here I was, Guildford Grammar, university degree, silver spoon in my mouth, hiding, not living my life. So that was one of my light bulb moments, one of the tipping points. After doing my father's eulogy successfully, people came up to me and said, look, Peter, if you can do this, you can do anything in your life. So from age 41 through to 50, I went on this big personal self-development, Feel the Fear campaign, and just joined Toastmasters, started stepping up and speaking at conferences on the area I was working in microbiology, and just embraced that and decided that I would never let fear be the reason I don't do the things I know I should do in my life. My father achieved so much without speech therapy, without university degrees, despite his severe stutter, and I was living a life based on self-limiting beliefs, and I just knew it was time to change. So I guess that was my dad's parting gift.
What a gift.
Yeah.
But what awareness on your part that you had to change your life, because it seems to me that despite your ability to to find love and to build a career. In your life, there is this fear that is linked to this thing.
Yeah.
And you find a way of conquering it. Was it really after the eulogy when people said you can do anything, or was it perhaps even when you were delivering the eulogy that you thought, I am doing this, the words are coming?
So the realisation was as I was preparing the eulogy, because Dad was born in 1909 and he had this life that we were unaware of. He married Mum when he was, I think, 41, and I was born when he was 48.
Yeah.
This part of his life, Mum revealed a lot of things, and I realised that this man was so determined, so capable, and didn't let anything stand in his way. And I realised that I had lived this life where I was, if there was a way around an avoidance,
Sure.
miss the school bus, tape record things, get the priest to nod, allow me to nod. And one moment really resonates with me. I remember when I was about 10 years old, my father coached the under 10 football team. Mm-hmm. No other father would do it. And Dad stuttered badly, and all the kids teased me about him stuttering. In fact, they said that after half time, we don't need showers anymore. We've already been showered by Mr. Dew. That's how bad his stutter was. And I used to hate my dad and think, why me? Why are you humiliating me? Why does my dad have to do this? Here I am trying to fly below the radar and just survive as a young boy who stutters, and my dad steps up and humiliates me. Fast forward to about age 35, my son comes to me with his mates and asks me if I will coach his cricket team. And I said, no, sorry, son, I'm too busy. What I really meant was I'm not prepared to take the risk. I'm not prepared to humiliate myself in front of my son. And as I'm preparing the eulogy and I recall that moment, I realised that my dad, he had the courage to step up for me, and I didn't have the courage to step up for my son. So that's when I realised I have to change.
Oh, they're bang on life moments, aren't they?
Oh, they are. They're valuable.
You become president of the Australian Speakeasy Association, chair of the World Congress of People Who Stutter. You leave the health department because you've got a lot to say and a great motivational story to tell. Is this a calling for you now?
Yeah, look, I've found my purpose in life, and sometimes people say, start with why. Why do you do what you do? And there's also that other saying, find something you're passionate about and you never have to work another day in your life. So it was 9 years ago that I took the very risky move of leaving the health department after 30 years and starting my business, I guess coaching, helping and speaking to people to find their voice and share their message. I guess much of my life comes from not having the ability to share my message. And if I can help people who've got important messages, important knowledge, experiences to share with their audiences, their communities, and I can give them the courage and the knowledge that they can also make a difference in people's lives, then that's my purpose.
It's your purpose. Are you a happy man?
I'm an extremely happy man. My kids gave me a book a while ago called Memento, and you kind of write down all the things in your life, your first kiss, your first movie, and it's about 130 pages. And in writing that book, I realised that if my life ended tomorrow, I'd be a very happy and a very content man.
What a pleasure it's been to meet you today, Peter. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
His name is Peter Dew. There was a time in his life he didn't talk